Die Diaspora spricht.
Parlando.
Diaspora
Conoscere. Falando. Diaspora parle.
Diaspora spreekt.
Diaspora speaking.
Përshëndetje. My name is Rina Limoni and I am the host of Diaspora Speaking. In the coming months, together with our guests, we will explore the journeys, personal histories, activism, and academic developments concerning Kosovo, Albanian, and Balkan diasporas to attain a deeper understanding of our communities scattered around the globe. In this episode, we will speak to Arbër Qerka-Gashi about digital archives and his platform Balkanism and explore the nature of memory preservance in the digital age. Arbër is a London-based writer, curator, researcher, visual artist, and events producer. He holds a BA in History from Goldsmiths, University of London, and a Master's in Gender, Sexuality, and Culture from Birkbeck, University of London. Arbër writes on LGBT+ themes, Balkan heritage, diaspora experiences, Albanian identity, and Kosovo's cultural expression. Arbër also founded the digital platform Balkanism and co-founded the Balkan London Collective. Welcome to Diaspora Speaking, Arbër.
Thank you so much, Rina. So lovely to be here with you today.
So happy you accepted my invitation. And today we will be speaking about Balkanism, through which we also met.
Very, very early days, we became good friends through our shared love of Balkan culture and social activism.
And something I should mention at the outset, this podcast started as an idea with Arbër, but unfortunately Arbër is committed otherwise, working on more than one project at the moment. Arbër, just to break the ice, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself? Where are you from in Kosovo? Where were you born? Where did you grow up? And what do you do in your day-to-day?
Thank you so much, Rina. And just kind of to piggyback off that, I think Rina has done such an incredible work with this platform and this podcast as well, because it's such a necessary space needed for conversations in the diaspora space, especially for people who come from places like Kosovo, Albania, the wider Balkan region. You know, there's conversations that are still not being had about what it means to be from the diaspora, and our existence and our identities. Now, some background about myself. Your introduction was very, very nice and about me, which is a bit weird to hear. Things that you've done can be quite, trippy, I guess. But a little background about myself. So I was born and raised in London, in East London. My parents originally come from Kosovo. What I like to do with my parents' background, because it serves as such a important facet to my identity and to my background, is I like to really get into the historical background of where exactly they're from, because it serves as such an important part of my research and my work and my cultural presentation as well. So my dad was born in Pristina, but his family originally come from a very small region, very small village known as Arbër in the Lop region, which is in northeastern Kosovo. So my dad's Albanian, but on my mother's side, she comes from kind of like an ethnically mixed family. So my granddad on my mother's side identified as Kosovan Turk. He had a very diverse cultural presentation, linguistically and culturally, and they were from Pristina, but they were said to have originally come from the Toplica region in southern Serbia. They were expelled from there around 200 years ago, but they developed a really, really deep connection with the city of Pristina. And my mother's mother was an Albanian woman from the village of Lismir, which is not too far away from Pristina. I always like to provide that background and that context because it's so important to me personally. My ancestors, my grandparents, they serve as such an important part of my research and as a part of my cultural presentation that I really wish to really bring more conversations around, around heritage, around background and the diversity of that in people's identities, because I think it's really significant to recognize. So like I said, I grew up in Britain. I grew up in London, in East London, which can be quite cutthroat and crazy to grow up in as a space. But I feel like in hindsight, I really wouldn't have it any other way, if that makes sense, because growing up in London afforded me the ability to kind of connect to my cultural background through my parents and through wider kind of community spaces, but also connect to so many different people from so many different cultures, which really kind of developed a great breadth of knowledge regarding different communities and actually create a lot of kind of like solidarity with people who come from different spaces. So, like I said, I grew up in East London, went through the normal educational system, went on to study my 2 degrees. And what I do in my day-to-day, right now I'm doing quite a few things, which, like Rena said, can be quite difficult and hectic to deal with, but we're trying our best. So I work freelance as a writer and curator. I do that independently. I work for a national organization known as Citizens Advice. I do like marketing for them, but then I also work for a museum known as the Migration Museum, and I'm currently working as a curator for them. We are launching an exhibition in September. And so, yeah, I'm just trying to kind of develop my kind of expertise regarding curation and cultural production, because that's something that like I've really kind of gotten into in my early 20s. I thought it was really difficult to do something like that, but slowly but surely I'm starting to see that, you know, people from potentially underprivileged backgrounds really need to be in these spaces as well. So yeah, that's what I do my day to day.
And knowing you, I have to say this, knowing you, one understands how much your personal and family background has an impact on your research and what you do. And I think it mirrors so well, and one can see the passion in your projects you're curating at the moment. And it brings us to the point of why we are having this conversation today. And the conversation is about Balkanism and your work at Balkanism. Balkanism is celebrating its 4th anniversary and has become an important platform for both Balkan diasporas and the region itself, where ongoing research about the region and culture is explored and very important to you. Just to start off, how did the idea to create Balkanism come about?
It's a great question. Very multifaceted one for sure. So from when I was a very, very young child, I've always had this obsession with the region. I guess it's a very diaspora thing to be kind of really obsessed with like your back home culture and your, you know, these narratives and like people's experiences. I was always very kind of intrigued to know more about, you know, what exactly happened within this region that has caused so much kind of like displacement. You know, I remember my parents speaking to Bosnian people in the playground or Croatian people in the playground or, you know, various different other ethnic communities and wondering like how we all ended up here, why we all ended up here, something that was really kind of really intrigued me from when I was very young. And so, but then I also went through a phase of being super like wannabe English, if that made sense. So like assimilation definitely massively impacted my own cultural presentation, and I desperately wanted to kind of conform. So I anglicized my name, I rejected my culture, rejected my language, rejected pretty much everything around me. Up until a certain point when I was like maybe 12 or 13, my dad kind of forced me to go to Kosovo for like a month, just me and him. And he took me to certain places that were quite culturally significant. So we went to Prizren, we went to Prekaz, we went to different parts that were very significant culturally and politically for Kosovo. It really kind of sparked an internal desire within me to start learning more about the Balkan region and about Kosovo and about my own personal history. And this kind of led me down kind of the necessity to go on social media and see social media platforms that were related to the Balkans. But a big issue was that when I came onto these social media platforms, they were always often very much ex-Yugo related, very much focused on cultural narratives that really didn't speak to me personally. Spoke to me in ways, of course, because of course Kosovo was once a part of Yugoslavia and there are cultural elements that we definitely relate to, but I didn't really see myself reflected. I didn't see the individuality of my cultural background reflected. And I really felt like there needed to be something about, you know, very specific cultural presentations and narratives that are really never represented. So that kind of led me to, obviously, when it comes to the end of secondary school or high school or sixth form, what do I want to study? So I decided to go to Goldsmiths because they had a Balkan Cultural Research Center, and it attracted me because I really wanted to be able to learn about the Balkan region in a more of an academic way rather than just buying books off Amazon or buying books off, you know, going back to Kosovo and buying a book on, you know, a market and actually reading it. I wanted to be able to learn the skills to critically engage with the Balkan region and its history. So then I started at Goldsmiths in my second year. I did a module on Serbian history from the Middle Ages to the present day. I then also did a module on Yugoslavia, the rise and fall. And this kind of allowed me to engage in Balkan history in a way that I really never did before. And it allowed me to kind of develop my own understanding of the region, the complexities of the region. And within this study, I was very much focused on Kosovo within these two kind of modules and understanding the way that Kosovo's history kind of came about and the impact of that. And as a part of kind of like studying the Balkan region, I came across Maria Todorova's concept of Balkanism, and it regarded a really problematic relationship the rest of Europe has had with the Balkan region, often kind of proselytizing really problematic stereotypes stereotypes regarding the Balkan region and its people. And I just kind of initially got the idea, you know, Balkanism, we need to reclaim what it means to be Balkan, the whole notion of reclaiming identity, reclaiming experience, presenting cultural presentation in a more authentic way. And so, yeah, like 2020 came along, COVID hit us all. I had through the years kind of like acquired a lot of archival material through my own family. I'm very blessed and lucky to say that I still have a lot of imagery that kind of depict my ancestors, my parents at different moments in their lives. And I really wanted to be able to utilize that archive. And Balkanism as a project, when I initially started, it was very, very personal. It was very much focused on me, my relationship with the Balkan region, because when you come from a family that has experienced multiple forms of displacement intergenerationally, that really does result in a relationship with many countries in the region. So obviously my parents are from Kosovo, but we have a relationship to Macedonia. We have a relationship to Bosnia, to Turkey, to Albania, and different parts of the region. And so I wanted Balkanism to be able to be as a platform that was solely focused on my relationship, my understanding, my exploration, my research. But then when it was formed, I saw the necessity, like the hunger, the urgency for other people to see themselves reflected on this platform, because I was very clear that when Balkanism started, it was very clear on its stances when it came to social rights issues. We weren't going to be a space that would be repackaging the same problematic stereotypes and power systems that have existed within the Balkan region and Balkan communities in the diaspora. Once more, I wanted it to be a very progressive space. Yes, a space where you could engage in your culture, but a space where you don't have to deal with the added burden of sexism, of racism, of homophobia. And so I've always tried to work in a way that really strives to deconstruct these ideologies and try to be as progressive as possible. So that was kind of like the origin story of Balkanism. Obviously, there were other circumstances that saw the platform develop in the way that it did, which I'm super grateful for. But it was really focused on my desire to see myself reflected within the Balkan space, because I've never really seen it presented before.
In your words as well, you say that Balkanism has aimed to portray culture in a positive light. And given that exposure to an audience requires thought, research, and careful consideration, what is your selection process or method of compiling this archive for your digital space?
It is such a necessity to be as careful and as considered when it comes to developing a space like Balkanism, because of the friction and because of the tensions and because of the sensitivity when it comes to identity, when it comes to ethnic identity and religious and cultural experiences that for many people are so rooted and deeply connected to trauma. And the way that I've tried to lead on this process is always leading with good intention. The reality is that we are human beings and we do make mistakes at times. And even I potentially have misspoken in my life because I'm not perfect, but all human beings at the end of the day. But one thing that I've always strived to do with Balkanism is to really make sure that I'm trying to hold myself accountable, in the sense that if I don't know something, I really want people to be able to educate me. And this is something that has always been a key thread through Balkanism from the very beginning. I would very much, open an open-ended question in the comments, say, if this doesn't resonate with you, let me know. If you want to know more about this subject, please DM me. If you know more about this, or if you know where this image is from, or if you know the complexities of what it means, please do DM us. And I've always tried to be as accountable and as responsible when it comes to that, because sometimes people lead certain projects with ego rather than genuine research. And for me as a person, which is why I've not really been so focused on me as a person regarding Balkanism, I've always been very protective of myself and protective of my space, because I wanted more so the focus to be on the work. That has always been my process in the past, being very open and actually creating community and actually engaging in dialogue with people from different Balkan communities in order to be able to develop a space and develop a working method that is trying and striving to be as authentic as possible. Now, this again doesn't mean that we're not going to get things wrong at times. Through the years, there have been moments where I potentially have gotten things wrong, but I've always welcomed constructive criticism. With that being said, there are moments where people are disrespectful, where I have to draw the line because I am a human being, and I always try to lead with good intention. And I feel and I hope and I pray that people see that good intention coming from me. They see that I am genuinely dedicated to this research. It's been something that has consumed, well, I don't want to use consumed because consumed has negative connotations, but it's literally been a running theme in my life to be so dedicated to the Balkan region and study about the region, especially ethnic and cultural identity. It's something that really feeds me personally and genuinely interests me. So I really do hope that people see that, I really approach this in a good intentioned way, but that doesn't mean that I'm above reproach and above criticism. And so that's the way that I've led it. And I guess running a page like Balkanism has given me the opportunity to really kind of be very, very self-critical and engage in like potentially overthinking. So that's usually the way that I develop kind of like content. So making sure to criticize everything in the image, making sure to provide a very analytical lens. I feel like coming from Kosovo, being Albanian, has given me a very critical lens to begin with, especially within the Balkan space. There can often be a lot of romanticism and problematic portrayals, but when you come from the margins, when you come from a community that has historically been marginalized, it gives you this positionality to overly criticize and have a completely different lens that potentially more dominant groups don't have. And so I feel like that has given me the ability to kind of critically engage with Balkan research. And this definitely informs the way that I archive and the way that I present information.
To stay within the presentation and selection of the digital objects, as you are saying, cultural production has not traditionally been independent from power structures. And as has been observed elsewhere, digital objects are not neutral containers of artifacts. Being a male-dominated space with patriarchal and narratives of dominant cultures prevailing, as you mentioned, you are trying to expose more of the Albanian experience, traditionally erased from Balkan physical and digital spaces. Another important point here as well, and it relates to the experience of women and minorities. How do you ensure a feminist practice in your work that expose power structures in relation to gender, sexuality, and race?
Really great question. And I think it's something that really has always pushed me as a person to be as kind of like intersectional as possible when it came to the way that I produced archives or produced memory making or produced kind of like knowledge. Because I think, like you said, historically, the archive, the historical institution, these spaces have often been dominated by individuals that have been extremely privileged, and they've held positions of power, and they've had that ability to actually reproduce histories and really kind of like influence large swathes of people, which is so impactful. And I think what's quite amazing about nowadays is that we do have social media, and we do have the ability to actually develop our own kind of like digital platforms or spaces where we can start archiving and take that power away. With that being said, I think, like you said, it's always very important and integral to make sure that we are being as critical as possible. So just from my own academic experience, I've always been very critically engaged and really desperate to apply a very intersectional approach to when I kind of like produce archival material, produce work, because I want to make sure that I'm speaking to the community that I'm serving. And I think this relates to me personally because, you know, given my heritage, given my mum's ethnic diversity within her family, I was raised exposed to the realities of a diverse experience within the Kosovan context. And I think that's something that was really integral for me and something that I've massively interwoven within Balkanism as a space to make sure that when I am using a photo that's from a Gorani family or from a Torbeshi family or from a community or Roma community, for example, that are significantly underrepresented, I'm actually communicating with the people that I'm representing. This is something that I've always strived to do. And I think given the fact that the platform has such a large scope, it has allowed me to actually create that sense of communication. And so I've always opened up the conversation when I have been unsure or when I've needed that lived experience to make sure that they have a part of the narrative building and that they have a part of the way that they want to be represented through the Balkanism platform. And regarding kind of like the feminist approach, obviously I need to acknowledge the fact that I am a man. With that being said, I was raised in a space that was very much female dominated. And so there are experiences and privileges that I have that most women within my community and culture don't have. And I very much acknowledge that. What's very interesting is that a lot of people, before they find out that I, create the platform, a lot of people think I'm a woman because the themes that I'm engaging with are kind of, I guess you could say, gendered stereotypes of only women are into traditional clothing or into traditional narratives and men are into something else. And so I desperately tried to kind of like queer that narrative and kind of like switch it on its side, but also acknowledging my own positionality as well. And I strive to be as critical as possible. For example, recently we did a post on kind of like my mother's marriage. And I think sometimes within the cultural space, people can apply a really kind of romanticized lens to marriage and to that whole process. And from my own conversations as somebody who is engaged in a lot of kind of like oral history research with women in my family, I've really wanted to kind of sit down and actually listen to what they say and just kind of like take that back or take that to the Balkanism platform and present that information within that nuance and within that complexity. So you see it within the caption of me speaking about kind of like the rich folkloric traditions of the makeup used or the dress presented or, you know, certain traditions, but also speaking about the emotionality and the wider structures of patriarchy and misogyny that have existed within our cultures that have also negatively implicated women. Because as somebody, like I said, raised within a space, I was exposed directly to the difficulties that women have to undergo within a very cultural patriarchal space, despite not having experienced those feelings or power structures myself. But they very much have made me an ally, I guess you can say, to women and to their causes and to their experiences. And it's something that I desperately try to kind of like place within my work just to make sure that women feel as safe as possible within this space, while also acknowledging my own positionality as somebody who is a man, because of course I completely understand that I don't have those first-hand lived experiences.
This reflects inclusivity and also an intersectional approach to archival work, but also memory. So in this regard, would you say Balkanism is a collective memory reproduction, a collective memory making endeavor?
Yeah, definitely. I think memory serves as such an important part of me and of my identity, because fundamentally, like, I'm recounting memories I don't have, if that makes sense. So when I'm recounting the images of my parents or my great-grandparents or people in my family, these are not memories that I've personally lived, but they're memories that I'm trying to archive and trying to re-establish in the present day, because I feel like there is great knowledge and great power in their narratives and in their experiences. With that being said, I feel like it is very important to recognize the fact that I'm coming from a very specific positionality. For example, there's one photo of my grandparents on their wedding day that really speaks to me personally, and it's probably one of my favorite images of all time. And there are things about that image that I will never know, just simply because I wasn't there, just simply because I didn't experience that. And there are things that I potentially romanticize about the image, or like overly add, you know, these beauties and these nuances that could have been completely different. But I feel like recognizing the fact that I come from this diaspora space, recognizing the fact that I'm trying to almost conceptualize a new memory due to the significance that this image holds, and also due to the significance that a lot of these people that are in these images I don't even know, if that makes sense, but I desperately want to know and haven't been given that privilege of knowing. So I think memory making is such a good like way to put it, but is really significant for us in the diaspora as well, because that often is one of the only ways that we can really engage in our culture.
And to stay within the memory lane for a bit longer, you just mentioned this particular event or photograph of your grandparents on their wedding day. And as you said, there are parts of that particular event you will never fully know. And to follow the idea of, you know, what you can recall and refer to the nature of memory making on the digital space, social media particularly, but the digital space more generally, give anyone want the opportunity to produce and build a collective memory, independent whether it represents the embodied experience, and to some degree then perhaps also adapt these as personal experiences, events that they have not lived. So given this, what do you think are the possible ways your work at Balkanism contributes to meaning making, and how your work may influence audiences in the diaspora but also in the Balkans generally?
That is such a good question. Firstly, I think digital spaces are so significant because they've given us the ability to take back control of the narrative. Historically, when you look at archiving, historically, when you look at historiography or the practice of like studying history, it was always very elitist, and it was never really with the people and for the people. And something that I've always desperately wanted to do is disseminate information in a way that is accessible to people from all different socio-political or economic backgrounds. And that's something that is really significant because I do yield power and I do yield privilege of being able to have been educated in the UK. And so I want to be able to give back to my own community and give back to the diaspora, which is why Balkanism has always been very focused on the work and not me as an individual. And in terms of meaning making, that is such a good way to put it. But I think it's so significant because for me, especially given like certain circumstances around the world right now, like I speak a lot through Balkanism about Palestine, and a lot of people are often critiquing me, why are you speaking about Palestine? Palestine isn't a part of the Balkans. But there are such parallels in my family's historical experience and the historical experiences of people from Palestine that there is a necessity for me to speak about Palestine due to those overlappings of experiences of oppression. And so when I use an image of my grandparents, when I use an image of moments at times of my family in war or different people in the Balkan regions at war and make it about and kind of introduce the conversation around global conflicts that are happening in Palestine or Congo or Sudan or whatever it may be, I'm doing it because I want Balkan people to understand the significance of these experiences and actually bring it back to the Balkan region. So making a new meaning out of these images, not just representing the Balkans, but also making it a globalized collective experience of oppression that we are all facing, all historically faced at different moments of our history. And I think that is something that is so significant about the digital space, because we have that power to be able to educate others and able to kind of like open people's minds to the realities that people have faced. Because a big issue that I have personally faced is within the Yugoslav discourse or within kind of like Balkan social media spaces, Kosovo historically was never presented as a colony, or the experiences of Albanians in Kosovo and Macedonia or Montenegro or Serbia and Greece were never properly depicted or represented in the way that they should have. And so this is something that really serves my work, to be able to use our own experiences historically to really drill forward a very progressive and very open-minded, an approach that really embeds liberation for all of us and all communities that transcend the Balkan diaspora. Like you said, you know, we want to influence audiences outside of just the Balkan region, because what I've found through Balkanism is the level of kind of like inter-ethnic solidarity, not just within the region, but externally, that we've made as a platform is so incredible. People from the Middle East, people from African cultures, people, Kurdish communities, people from South Asian communities seeing themselves in Balkanism as well, which is so incredible. Which is another reason why I created the platform, because the Balkan presentation within certain other Balkan social media spaces tends to almost be stereotypical and not the real that I know, if that makes sense, which is why I feel like Balkanism is quite significant and why it really speaks to people.
And frankly, it is commendable, and I find it inspiring. And I say inspiring because what we see in most Balkan pages is a war narrative mainly, unfortunately. Balkanism acknowledges the significance of remembering and how we are a byproduct of war. And without being negligent, it shows a more nuanced view of the Balkans or Balkan people beyond the shadow of conflict and war.
I think as a platform, I think for me as a person who stems from this family that has been displaced intergenerationally and being exposed to these kind of like narratives within my family from when I was very young, it was very difficult to kind of conceive a culture that was, I guess the stereotype of the culture was very much just negative. It was, war, it was genocide, it was ethnic cleansing. It was really, really deeply negative. And I think there are lots of communities that undergo this kind of internal dialogue and this internalized friction of actually understanding what your culture is. And I guess for me, that kind of whole process of researching my heritage and researching my identity really exposed me to the little happy moments that existed within my culture and that existed within my culture's presentation, and understanding that my people may have been at times in history where they're experiencing these really drastic systems of oppression, but that doesn't mean that they didn't laugh with each other and dance with each other and listen to music and engage in oral history telling within their, gardens, or these really small intimate moments. And I think that is something that I've always desperately tried to represent through Balkanism and use it as a way to kind of interweave conversations of transitional justice and conversations of progressiveness and conversations of dealing with war and trauma as well. Because I think these are experiences that we need to acknowledge. And I think Balkanism as a platform has always been very keen on acknowledging the way that genocide and ethnic cleansing and intergenerational trauma has affected us collectively as a community in different ways, but also acknowledging the intimate moments and those moments in time that represent a different narrative or a different conversation that really need to be represented. And it's something that is really important to me, because when I have children or my nieces or my nephews or whoever it may be, I want them to acknowledge the fact that yes, we have a very difficult history, but we also have a history full of really beautiful traditions and really beautiful music and food and dance and history and culture, and very rich in that sense as well. And I think this is something that Balkanism has desperately tried to promote. And it's actually so amazing because there's so many people through the platform that through the years have messaged us and said, before I hated being Balkan, I hated being from the region, because all it was kind of like war and bad people and this narrative that really kind of got within them. But they said to me, the moment they came onto the platform, they found something different. They found beauty in the music. They found beauty in the traditions. And that is such a kind of like fantastic feeling to have internally, to think that I have given people a reason to be, I wouldn't say prideful, because prideful often has like these really negative connotations in like the Balkans, but giving people a reason to kind of like be joyful about coming from this region, being joyful about coming from a specific ethnic group and feeling a sense of strength from that identity rather than feeling a sense of disparity. Because I think as people, both of us being from Kosovo, we can understand the kind of difficulty of coming from an identity that can be so politically charged, even though it shouldn't be, but that's how it is conceived in like the Western world especially. That's something that has really pushed me and moved me to really use cultural production and culture as a way to kind of really get people to find moments of joy and moments of beauty in our culture, because they very much exist and they're there to be represented.
And I think you're doing a great job, especially with the representation of the positive aspects of our culture. And in this regard, you recently had the opportunity to hold a physical lecture at the Victoria and Albert Museum. Well done to you, Arbër. You should be really proud of yourself, where you explored the Balkan material culture. Can you tell us more, and will we have the privilege to see this expand in the future?
Thank you so much, Rina. It definitely was a very pinch me moment in my life. I used to work at the V&A. For people who don't know, I used to work there in the bookshop. Very humble beginnings. Just worked there for a couple years. I'm also a tour guide at the V&A Museum, and just speaking to curators in the museum space, I was able to kind of really approach it in a very non-traditionalist way. Like I said, cultural spaces, archival spaces, spaces to do with culture, history, especially material culture, tend to be very elitist. And so I always felt like I could never really hold space when it came to certain issues like this. And so what happened was I just really kind of approached them. I pitched the idea. I said, nobody has really never done anything about the Balkan region at the V&A Museum. There's such an incredible collection of material culture that speak to so much more than just traditional clothing. They speak to history, they speak to identity, they speak to the complexities of experiences. And to be given that opportunity was really quite overwhelming, to be fair, but also really, really humbling and really incredible, because I just saw the level of like necessity it created in people after the lecture. I had so many people just contact me or just approach me straight after, just thanking me that this even existed. They were so surprised that the V&A had put an exhibition on like this, and a talk on like this. And so it's something that I definitely want to do more in the future. My goals for Balkanism is to see it expand in in a much more educational way. So potentially hosting talks, potentially hosting other events of that nature, because obviously we didn't speak about it much, but I do events on the side, more club night events, which are also very fun and great for the Balkan diaspora. But I would love to transition onto doing, panel conversations about the Balkan region, because Balkanism has been really significant and important as a digital platform on social media, but I definitely see it developing and transitioning into more lectures and talks and spaces for people to actually engage in physical discussion and conversation, for sure.
And we're all looking forward to it. As we're speaking about future plans, later this month, celebrating the 4th anniversary of Balkanism, the collective is launching its first issue, Diversity as Strength. Can you reveal more about the first publication of Balkanism?
I'm so excited, a tad bit stressed, but very, very excited that we will be launching Balkanism, the very first issue of our publication, which is titled Diversity as Strength. I wanted to kind of call it Diversity as Strength because the region has such diversities when it comes to ethnic, cultural, religious, but also different disciplines, different artistic approaches, different ways of seeing the world and different experiences, that I really wanted to be able to create a physical publication that's almost like the amalgamation of all the work that Balkanism has been doing in these last 4 years within like a physical imprint and also online publication. And it's been a long time in the making. I remember maybe 2021, I kind of like got this book and I wrote Balkanism, Diversity as Strength, issue 1, 2021, because I was very naive to what it required to like do a publication and like have something like that. Like I thought, it would be easy, I'll just do it, like I'll just get it done together. But I was also studying my master's then. I was in a very, very different headspace and hadn't had the experience of working on publications myself now, having written for them. And also kind of like whether it be curating events or whether it be kind of like organizing other things, I thought it would be very easy, but it's actually very, very difficult, especially when we're doing this work completely self-funded. But I also want to say a massive thank you to you, Rena, for sharing our crowdfunding campaign, which we did between April and June, and also to everyone listening to this that contributed to the crowdfunding campaign. We wouldn't have been able to do the publication without your help, first and foremost. I also want to be clear that like Balkanism has always been a free platform because like I said, I want information to be able to be accessible for everybody. But I did see that there was a real gap in the market regarding publications, and I am a sucker for independent publications. It's something that I love. I just love an independent zine or magazine. It's something that really gets me and I just adore them. And also it's good to support these initiatives. And so going back to the crowdfunding campaign, I went through art agencies, I went through different collectives, I went through so many different, forms to be able to get to secure funding. But given, I feel like Balkanism's positions on like certain issues, it was really difficult to secure that funding. But I just want to thank everybody that supported us in that crowdfunding campaign. We raised £4,200, which is just so incredibly grateful and so generous of people to be able to just, give their money, especially at this time in the world right now. So yes, later this month, we will be having a launch of our magazine. Details of that will be released very shortly about where it is. I really want to be able to, make the magazine as accessible to people on a global basis. So I'm trying with memesheme shpirt, as we say in Albanian, with my body and with my soul to make sure that we're making it accessible to people all around the world. We have essays and we have articles and we have photography, we have poetry, we have prose, we have artwork. We have people from so many different backgrounds, so many different disciplines, so many different experiences. We have essays on, traditional dance and essays on, the yelek, the traditional clothing. And it's so incredible to put together a piece of work that I feel like is so needed for our region. I also can't wait for everybody to see the cover because it's like my favorite image ever, which I would want to thank Janet Rainek for supplying us with that image. I also want to thank Verica Petrovic, who is my designer. We've been working on that together and I just can't wait for everybody to see it. It's definitely very overwhelming, very scary, very like, can't believe it's happening.
I'm very excited to read it and hold it in my hands, frankly. But this brings us to the end of this conversation. And something that I ask every guest joining this podcast is this question. What is the one thing that you would bring from Kosovo to the diaspora that is missing for you?
Oh, wow. That's such a good question. Wow. I'm a bit of a hippie. in the sense that like I just love Kosovo's land, if that makes sense. Like there's just something about the earth in Kosovo that just makes me feel very calm, very peaceful. There's something about like the equilibrium of the land, if that makes sense. Like it just makes you feel peaceful inside, and I just feel so deeply connected to the ground and like the trees, and like I don't know what it is, like, you know, England has so much greenery as well. Like when we're going on a motorway to like Luton Airport, you see all greenery around you, but it just doesn't hit me in the same way that like Kosovo's land does. Like the moment I see Kosovo's land, it's just something that really instinctive, very, very connected, very just like, it just makes me feel something more different. And so that's something that I would love to bring, just like the physicality of Kosovo's land here, or just like the forests, or like Gurmi, or like something like that, like something that was very much like encapsulating Kosovo's physical land is something that I really miss when I'm in London, because there's just something special about it for me personally.
And that's a beautiful and earthly ending to this thought enticing conversation. And as we are at the end, I just want to say thank you so much, Arbër, for sharing your knowledge, work, and ideas with the audience of Diaspora Speaking. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation.
Thank you so much for having me, Rena.